Literatures of the world in English. When we consider English literature, we should ask ourselves what exactly it is we are talking about. English writers, literature about England or Britain in general, or is it literature in English but from other countries? A traditional view of what we have always called English literature includes the works of English as well as Irish, Scottish, and Welsh authors. The USA obtained political independence in 1776, and as a consequence, they have developed a uniquely American literature and art. However, there's a lot more to say about literature in English if we consider, for example, all the countries which were part of the British Empire. The short video is a general introduction to some of the best-known authors of what we now call literatures of the world in English. The collapse of the British Empire did not mean the end of English as a literary language. Paradoxically, the fall of the British Empire has meant that English has become the language of a number of non-Western cultures. Kazuo Ishiguro, for example, studied in England and was able to deal equally well with Japanese and English subjects, as he did in his famous The Remains of the Day. The following quote is a simple way to appreciate the mastery of language and feel the mood of the story. After all, what can we ever gain in forever looking back and blaming ourselves if our lives had not turned out quite as we might have wished? The local Indian traditions had always been expressed through local languages, until, in the 20th century, the British imposed their education system based on the English language. It was only during the 30s and 40s that Indian novelists started to publish their works in English. They wrote about poverty, the clash between religious belief and Western ideas, peasant life, the caste system. The struggle for cultural autonomy was a significant part of the process of national transformation and Indian emancipation, which culminated in the Declaration of Independence in 1947. After R.K. Narayan's An Astrologer's Day and Other Stories, published in 1947, Salman Rushdie published his Midnight's Children, a comical allegory on Indian history centered on the lives of the narrator Saleem Sinai and the 1,000 children born at the exact hour of the Declaration of Independence, and won the Booker Prize in 1981. He was as much a stranger to the stars as were his innocent customers. Yet he said things which pleased and astonished everyone. That was more a matter of study, practice, and shrewd guesswork. All the same, it was as much an honest man's labor as any other, and he deserved the wages he carried home at the end of the day. What's real and what's true aren't necessarily the same. Most of what matters in our lives takes place in our absence. Salman Rushdie also wrote the Satanic Verses. It's Rushdie's fourth novel, and it was published in 1988. Rushdie used magical realism and relied on contemporary events and people to create his characters. The title refers to the Satanic Verses, a group of Quranic verses that refer to three pagan Meccan goddesses. The Satanic Verses received positive reviews. However, major controversy ensued as Muslims accused it of blasphemy and mocking their faith. The outrage among Muslims resulted in a fatwa calling for Rushdie's death. The result was several failed assassination attempts on Rushdie, who was placed under police protection by the UK government, and attacks on several connected individuals, including the murder of translator Hitoshi Igarashi. Let's read a few famous quotes from this novel. Language is courage, the ability to conceive a thought, to speak it, and by doing so, to make it true. Question: what is the opposite of faith? Not disbelief, too final, certain, closed, itself is a kind of belief, doubt. The West Indies now. It is in the 1950s that writers began to produce novels that tried to describe the peculiarity of Caribbean society. Among them, V.S. Naipaul, born in 1933 and who died in 2018, whose novel A House of Mr. Biswas is considered a real masterpiece. It is the analysis of the colonial world and mentality and of the weakness of the West Indian people as seen by the author. In this novel, Naipaul writes, "Ostracized from the community into which he was born, he had shown the futility of its sanctions. He had simply gone outsiders." Literature in English by African authors is mainly a phenomenon of the second half of the 20th century. Peter Abrahams, who died in 2017, dealt with the fight against apartheid, a theme also dealt with by Nadine Gordimer. Her works are explicitly critical of the policy of apartheid and deal with the master-servant relation typical of South African life. Chinua Achebe, in his famous Things Fall Apart, published in 1958, gave a historical interpretation of the transition of the Igbo people from colonial times to independence. Wole Soyinka, of middle-class Christian Yoruba family, studied in England and returned to Nigeria in the 60s. He was involved in political activism and imprisoned for 2 years. Let's now read together a few quotes from these African authors. Mom had a kind of love for her that you could feel, like it was part of the atmosphere. The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amused of his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. A tiger doesn't proclaim its tigerness. It jumps on its prey. The man dies in all who keep silent in the face of tyranny. On July 1, 1867, with passage of the British North America Act, the Dominion of Canada was officially established as a self-governing entity within the British Empire. Canada is a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy in the Westminster tradition. The country is a realm within the Commonwealth of Nations. It ranks among the highest in international measurements of government transparency, civil liberties, quality of life, economic freedom, and education. It is one of the world's most ethnically diverse and multicultural nations, the product of large-scale immigration from many other countries. Among Canadian best-known writers, Alice Munro, a short story writer who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2013. Her work has been described as having revolutionized the architecture of short stories, especially in its tendency to move forward and backward in time. Her stories explore human complexities in an uncomplicated prose style. Munro's work is compared with great short story writers. In her stories, all is based on the epiphanic moment, the sudden enlightenment, the subtle and revelatory detail. Margaret Atwood. Atwood's works encompass a variety of themes including gender and identity, religion and myth, the power of language, climate change, and power politics. Many of her works are inspired by myths and fairy tales which interested her from a very early age. The Edible Woman, published in 1969, tells the story of a woman who feels she's a mere product and is also a study on gender roles. Among her most important works, The Handmaid's Tale, we mentioned in the video about dystopian literature, and Oryx and Craig, published in 2003, the description of a post-apocalyptic world in which the Quakers, genetic engineered creatures, seem to have become the only inhabitants of the world. Alice Munro and Margaret Atwood wrote, "Always remember that when a man goes out of the room, he leaves everything in it behind. When a woman goes out, she carries everything that happened in the room along with her." Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. A rat in a maze is free to go anywhere, as long as it stays inside the maze. This is indeed a huge world to explore, and I hope this short video will be the beginning of your never-ending journey through some of the best stories ever written by contemporary men and women. To set off on this journey, you can also refer to the links in the description section.